Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sprint 237 review. This is a normal 2-week sprint, so let's get started. I'll start with the overview, Jeffrey on the UI, Adam on the providers, and Joe is out today, so I'll take over on the platform. This is a pretty typical sprint with 130 PRs merged this sprint. Lots of enhancements, especially as we start adding our new providers, and a lot of bugs were fixed this sprint. And over to Jeffrey on the UI.
Thanks, Jason. In Sprint 237, a total of 9 PRs got merged into the UI Classic repository, out of which 4 are related to bug fixes, 2 for enhancements, and 3 others. I can explain about them in the following slides. Gilbert fixed a bug in the reconfigure virtual machines page. The bug was that when we changed the permission settings by taking out the reconfigure network configuration, it would still show up in the form. And this was rectified by making a few changes in the React reconfigure form component. Next slide. The repository's toolbars was not working as I expected before. When we hit the refresh button and the edit tags, an error page was displayed. Gilbert made a fix for this by writing additional checks in the toolbar related files and making sure the correct partial files are being loaded. Next slide. Gilbert added a few entries in the routes.pending.yaml file relating to the embedded Terraform's credential repositories and template controllers. This was done to fix failing RBAC specs. Next slide. When we visit the request page that has a dialog with the tag field, which points to a tag value that was deleted or doesn't exist, we would see an error page. And this PR was from Gilbert, which adds a check to see the existence of this value. Next slide. As you can see in the screenshot, a few of the product features were renamed by Joe. Changes were made to Ansible credential, Ansible repositories, workflow credentials, and workflow repositories, etc. And dependent PRs were also raised for repositories like ManageIQ, Schema, and embedded Terraforms. Next slide. This PR is from Gilbert to introduce the add and edit form for the repository and credential modules. Next slide. Jason upgraded Yarn to 4.1.1 and later to 4.2.1. Also, yarn.log file was updated with latest dependencies. That's all from the UI side. Over to Adam for providers.
Thanks, Jeffrey. For providers this sprint, so the big one for core is we added the embedded Terraform plugin that we've been working on for a couple of sprints now to the gem file, so it should be present for existing builds without having to patch anything. So if you want to test that out, it should be there now. For Amazon, Joe made a change to delay load the net SCP gem to reduce memory usage. He did this for a bunch of gems, so we'll cover those later. We also updated the AWS instance types to add the G6 extra large type flavors. For Ansible Tower and AWX, Joe delay loaded the Ansible Tower client. Next slide. All right, and for embedded Terraform this sprint, we moved the OpenTofu runner container image name to an environment variable so that it can be modified at runtime if the user wishes. Before it was hard-coded to an image name in the systemd unit, and now we get that from the environment variable list. We also added the OpenTofu worker class, which is responsible for running the OpenTofu runner container on both Podified and on appliances. Particularly for appliances, this is cool because it is a worker that has no Rails classes loaded. It just is a pure systemd unit that runs Podman to run the container. For Kubernetes, Joe delayed loaded the Prometheus client gem, and for Overt and Rev, he did the same for Overt Metrics and Overt SDK4. And as well for VMware, he delay loaded the RabbitMQ Bunny gem. Next slide. And lastly, for workflows, this is a pretty big one. We added a new built-in runner type. So in addition to having the Docker resource type for tasks, there's now a built-in one. The initial PR that landed had support for sending an email. So you can send using the ManageIQ generic mailer from an ASL file, you can send an email that way. And then Keenan added a provision execute built-in method, which lets you run an MIQ provision task from an ASL workflow. And that is it for providers. Over to Jason.
Okay, on the platform side for enhancements, the NetSSH gem was bumped for an OpenSSL 3 support. In fact, a number of gems were bumped, especially because on the Red Hat side, OpenSSL 3.2 was added to the repositories in addition to 3.0, and it created conflicts in certain places. So there's a number of bumps, such as Linux admin gem to 3.0 for the NetSSH fix. We no longer pass the MIQ request ID as a dialog parameter. The parameters were getting merged together, and this separated dialog parameters from other parameters. State machine task status was worked by Keenan to refactor out automate specific methods back into core so that they could be reused for workflows. That was part of his provision execute work. Adam added a generic mailer method that creates an MIQ task. There was one that put it on the queue, but there was nothing that monitored the progress, which is what we needed on the workflow side. So he created a version that uses a task and keeps some status. I worked on replacing Ripper Ruby parser with Prism. In the descendant loader, we actually parse code, and we were using a gem called Ripper Ruby parser that's pretty old. And Prism seems to be the new parser that's for Ruby. That's going to be the big hot thing. So we moved to that, and that has a Ruby parser compatible layer in it, which worked out really well. Brandon had a fix for building appliances so that the serial console is available for using KubeVirt for when you deploy in KubeVirt. A change was made to print the memory consumed and loaded files for each require line by Joe. This was more for a diagnostics type thing, but it gives a lot more information, and that's what led to him reducing the memory and all those other PRs. And finally, Adam added the OpenTofu runner service for running the OpenTofu runner. More enhancements. Joe worked on generalizing the product features, which you saw on Jeffrey's slide, changing the Ansible specific ones to embedded Terraform or embedded workflows where appropriate. And then there was a schema change for that as well. Since the names were changed, we had to fix those in the database. And finally, there were some dependency updates. Go was updated and Go dependencies were updated by Brandon. I worked on updating Yarn to 4.2.2. And the ED25519 gem that was brought in by Linux admin was bumped also for the OpenSSL 3 support. On the bug side, bugs were some fixes in Ruby 3.1 in the Linux admin gem. Appliance console was bumped for a Kafka fix. And then Nasser also worked on the Kafka health check to rework it to use, instead of using a specific topic that we kind of posted to, he uses the admin interface. Gilbert fixed something with the Ansible Tower template so that they present it properly in the UI. Keenan had a fix for the state machine task status a little later after he made the initial PR. More changes for the NetSCP fix, bunch of gems were updated. I don't know this one. Somebody worked on improving the defaults for optional positional Ansible runner workflow parameters. Adam made a fix in Git work tree rugged Git layer so that if somebody changes the URL, it will actually honor that change and pull from that remote URL instead of kind of ignoring it. Ruby parser was fixed to move as a non-development gem, as it's now a dependency of Prism itself. Again, Nasser worked on reworking the Kafka health check in ManageIQ messaging ready, which is the appliance half of the change. And there was a missing Kafka client CA cert that was fixed in the appliance console. More work on the OpenSSL stuff from Brandon, including reverting an initial fix that he had to get us to 3.2, and then realized we couldn't go to 3.2, so we went down to 3.0, which is all four of these PRs right here. And I believe that's it for the platform. And that's it for our Sprint 237 review. Our next Sprint review 238 will be on May 29th at the usual place and time. And as always, I'd like to thank all the presenters today, all the contributors to Manage IQ, and all of our community members. Thanks, everyone.